It's our honor today to hear from Comptroller Justin Wilson, and with him is Susan Matson, the analyst for the Comptroller's office. And I'll just turn you loose, Mr.
Oh,
Comptroller.
goody. Give you. Okay. I'm Justin P. Wilson. I'm the State Comptroller. This is Susan Matson. She is expert analyst we've got over at our research department. She actually knows what she's talking about. We're here to present a study, and the study really is providing an overview of the financing of how we finance highways and bridges. That's what it does, how we pay for it, and some of the challenges we face, and really look at other ways of financing. I'll handle the easy part. I'll say what we're not studying, and Susan will say what we're studying. What we're not doing is that we're not making any recommendations. We're not telling you what you should do. And we're not saying how much money it's going to cost. We're not making those determinations. And having said what we don't do, Susan, why don't you tell us what we do?
Thank you. I'm going to start with a little background here. Our Tennessee state and local roads are supported by federal, state, and local funding. Our state roads, which are the primary roads in the state and carry the bulk of the traffic in the state, are funded in 2013. Were funded by 53% by federal taxes, and those federal taxes, 80% of those come from federal fuel taxes. About 44% came from state revenues, and about 65% of those came from state fuel taxes. You can see up there the gas tax, the motor fuel or diesel tax, and the special petroleum tax, and an additional 26% came from motor vehicle registration fees. Our local roads, which are the connector roads that get you to the primary roads that are the bulk of the miles but a lot less of the traffic involved, are funded about half of the money in 2011. This is for all the funds that local governments had for their highway expenditures came from state funds. These are state shared taxes. The counties, locals receive about 38% of the gas tax and 26% of the diesel tax. There's also some state aid highway funds that they share. And in that year, local revenues that they contributed themselves made up about 36% of those expenditures. The amount that local governments contribute varies considerably from county to county or city to city. I'll do a little comparison to other states, but we have to use some caution and when comparing to other states on highway funding, because different states have different terrain, weather, types of industry, and other factors that can make differences. Also, states vary on what roads are state roads and what roads are local roads, so that can make a difference. So I've looked at all funding together for all types of roads in the state. And in 2010, Tennessee's revenue per capita to highways was about $325, and that was the lowest in the U.S., where the average was about $620. Tennessee's also different in that it relies more heavily on highway user taxes than other states. Tennessee does not use debt financing, tolls, or general fund revenues for their highways, and most other states do. Tennessee's roads have generally been rated as being of good quality. In 2012, Tennessee was the fourth highest ranked in the percentage of roads in good condition, and in 2013, they were the 13th lowest ranked of the states in the percent of deficient bridges. What are the challenges that we're facing? The transportation revenues in Tennessee are not expected to be sufficient to maintain existing highways or to meet long-term transportation demand. The user fee revenues for the highways have stagnated. They have diminished growth, and they're not expected to increase unless there's some kind of changes that are made. Looking at, these are the revenues over time from 1989 to 2013. 1989 was the last time our gas tax was increased, and 1990 was the last time the diesel tax was increased. And as you can see, through the 90s, we had some increase in our revenues, but in the 2000s, it pretty much steadied out with a few fluctuations in there based on other factors. One reason this has happened is Tennessee's taxes are fixed rate taxes. They're per gallon taxes. So our revenues are really based on fuel consumption. And as you can see in this chart, you'll see a similar type trend. It was increasing during the 90s, then steadied out. You had that one big dip, I believe that was when Hurricane Katrina cut off a lot of the gas supplies. But then it's been fairly steady or decreased over the last few years. We're at lower levels of consumption. Since 2000, Tennessee highway user revenue increases have been less than increases in other measures that you might think of related to highway growth. In terms of highway revenues increased 8%, where population increased 14%, and our gross domestic product, showing a measure of our economic activity, increased 57% during that time period. Major problem has been that our revenue's been steady, but the inflation has eroded the purchasing power of our fuel tax revenue. As you can see, the top line is the revenues that came in, the nominal dollars. If you look at the red dotted line, that is what those dollars are worth, looking at the 85% increase in the consumer price index over that period. And the green line is a measure called the National Highway Construction Cost Index. It tries to measure changes in construction cost over time. And that index increased 56% during that time. But as you can see, it fluctuates a lot more than consumer price index. You know, as the price of fuel or asphalt or steel goes up, it can change dramatically. One of the factors going into our reduction in fuel consumption is that people are driving less. As you can see, these are the vehicle miles of travel over time, and they were going up again during the 90s, and they've pretty much leveled off since that time. But if you look at those numbers on a per capita basis, you can see that they're actually dropping, and people are driving less, they're using less fuel, which drives our tax revenues. Also, the increased fuel efficiency has reduced our fuel consumption. And under the new federal fuel efficiency standards, the CAFE standards, we're expected to see greater fuel efficiency over time. You know, they're projecting from 2013 average miles per gallon to go from about 30 up to about 50 by 2025. Yet another factor that's influencing our gas revenue or our gas revenues are uncertainty with federal funding. As I said earlier, the money for our state roads, about half of it is coming from the federal government. And there have been shortfalls in the Federal Highway Trust Fund in recent years, which Congress has used general funds, other taxes, to fill that gap. Also, Congress has continued to do short-term extensions to the federal highway program. And currently, there's only funds authorized or appropriated until May 2015 of this year. There have not been any long-term solutions passed by Congress in several years to address those shortfalls in the Highway Trust Fund. Also, the federal fuel taxes, you know, they have the same per gallon taxes like Tennessee's taxes, and they have not been increased since 1993. Local governments face the same challenges as the state with stagnating revenue and increasing cost. The local governments rely on the state share of fuel taxes, so when those have leveled off, their money from the state taxes have gone down. The local governments also have to use their other tax revenues to fund other highway expenditures, and some local governments, it's not to a great extent, or have borrowed funds to pay for resurfacing projects over the years. Now I'm going to move into some of the options. Within our report, it's on page 26, we list several evaluation criteria that you may want to consider when you're looking at different options or even current taxes on where we might go or what we might think about doing. Again, I will reiterate that we are not making recommendations in here, so I'm just going through a laundry list here. One of the criteria is the user benefit principle. Most of our gas taxes, our fuel taxes, our highway taxes are based on the user pays for their use of the road through those taxes. So a question to ask would be, do highway users pay taxes and fees in proportion to their highway use and in proportion to their relative wear and tear on the roads? There's equity issues. You could look, does a proposed change or a current tax put a greater burden on particular users? That could be based on income. It could be based on where they live as a rural versus urban area. Or it could be nowadays based on the type of vehicle they drive, because a lot of vehicles with the same size vehicles will get different gas mileage, so they're paying different amount of their taxes for their road use, similar vehicles. You may ask if it's aligned with other public policy, with the fiscal, the fuel efficiency standards, as well as environmental concerns. How does this line up with some of those concerns? What are the implementation and administrative costs of different types of tax structures? And sustainability is an issue. Does the revenue grow with the use of the transportation infrastructure? Does it grow with population? Does it grow with economic activity? Will it continue to support our economy in the future? I'm going to go through several revenue options, and then I'll go into a little more detail after I list what these are. Some of the options that are related to Tennessee's current highway taxes and fees include increasing the fuel tax rates. Another option is to index the fuel tax rate to inflation or the price of fuel or some other variable measure that grows with factors that affect transportation. Another is to increase motor vehicle registration fees. Some states have also added a use tax for alternative fuel or high mileage vehicles that pay little or no fuel taxes that support the upkeep of the roads, so that you would have everyone supporting the roads that they're driving on. Options used in other states include applying a sales tax to fuel purchases. Highway fuel is not taxed, does not have sales tax in Tennessee. It's exempt. Other states transfer general fund revenues to highways. They use debt financing, be it general obligation funds, and several states are looking more at public-private partnerships where they're partnering with private companies to build or take over some of the highway projects and to finance them at that time. Some states use weight distance taxes, especially for their larger trucks, the commercial freight traffic, where you're paying so much based on how much the truck weighs as well as how many miles that it drives. Other states have added local option highway taxes. These are where certain areas within the state have their own fuel taxes to support some of the road building in that area. Tennessee actually does authorize a 1-cent local option tax if subject to a referendum in an area, but it is solely to support public transportation and has not been enacted in any local governments here. Two more options that address some of the structural issues with current taxes would be the use of tolls. This is where the user is directly paying for their use of a particular road, and there's a movement and toward going to more mileage-based systems where people pay based on the miles that they drive in a year. So I'll go through some of these options, some little considerations with these options too. First, I'll talk some about the motor fuel taxes. Some of the strengths is the user pays tax. The people that are driving on the road are paying the tax because they're using through the fuel that they're using. In Tennessee, these are dedicated taxes that provide a stable source of revenue for the long-term highway projects. They have to plan for several years on those, so they'll know that the money is coming in. They have fairly low administrative costs. Out-of-state motorists pay these through the fuel they buy in the state. A small change in fuel taxes produces substantial revenue at a small cost to the users. And they also, under the current distribution formulas in our statute, they help support the local road expenditures. Some of the concerns with motor fuel taxes is that with the variation in fuel efficiency among vehicles and among similar cars, taxes are not as closely tied to road use as they used to be. Unless they're increased on a regular basis, they do not grow with the economy. and they are not directly tied to pavement damage of different sizes of vehicles. As I said, our gas tax, which is 21.4 cents, which 1.4 cents is a special petroleum tax, was last raised in 1989, and the diesel tax of 18.4 cents per gallon was last raised in 1990. Comparing our rates to other states, and Tennessee is the red line on there. It's hard to fit them all on there. Tennessee, with our gas tax, we are the 13th lowest in the United States. We're 9.8 cents per gallon below the U.S. average of 31 cents per gallon. And our diesel tax rates are the 7th lowest in the U.S., and they're 12.6 cents below the U.S. average, which is about 31 cents per gallon. As an example, I've included how much a vehicle that drives, a passenger vehicle, that drives about 15,000 miles per year, which is probably above average at this point, and they get 20 miles a gallon. They use about 750 gallons of gas in a year, and they would pay a total state and federal taxes, fuel taxes, of about $300 per year for their use of the roads. The state tax is about $160, the federal tax about $138, and most of the federal taxes do come back to the state for our highway programs. That's about 2 cents per mile, and a 1 cent increase in our fuel taxes, gas tax, would cost that vehicle owner about $7.50 per year, based on this example. Some brief revenue projections. A 1 cent increase in the gas tax would bring in about $30.9 million. That's about a 5% increase in that revenue from fiscal year 2013. Again, those are split between state and local roads. The states would get about $18.5 million, and local highways would get about $11.7 million. The diesel tax, a 1 cent increase, would bring in about $9.6 million, and that's about a 6% increase in that revenue from a year. And again, that is split somewhat between the state and local highways. It is shared. Some states are moving to variable rate or indexed fuel taxes. These provide a more sustainable source of revenue that grows with other factors that impact the need for transportation, like population and the economy, or they increase with price changes, depending on which measure that you use. Again, it remains a user pay tax. It retains the lower administrative costs if they're tied to our current taxes, and they require less frequent legislative action to change the rates. That would be built into the statute of how they would grow over time. Some of the concerns with these taxes is that some of the measures that you might tie it to can change a lot. There's going to be a lot of volatility in those changes, and so you wouldn't want your tax rate going up and down a whole lot. A lot of states have put in a ceiling and a floor in terms of, especially those that tie it to the price of gas, on this is the minimum price of gas per gallon, this is the maximum, and they limit the amount of change per year up to a certain percentage. There's some concern that with the somewhat automatic increases based on these indexes, that it would limit public debate on the changes. And it's also difficult to decide what kind of index to use to best reflect your highway costs. There's several ways that people have done this. One option that's used in 3 states right now, is to index your taxes based on the Consumer Price Index. And that's used in 3 states currently. And if we had done that back in 1989, our 20 cents gas tax, not including the special petroleum tax, would have been about 38 cents per gallon in 2013. And that would have been an additional $556.2 million in this current fiscal year. The diesel tax would have gone from about 17 cents a gallon to 30 cents a gallon, and that's an additional $124 million in that year. Some have suggested we try to index the highway construction costs, but this is more difficult to measure, and it fluctuates much more, and no other states have really done this. Some states have also tied their fuel tax rates to the wholesale or retail price of fuel. A lot of states will do that for part of their tax revenues. They'll have a fixed rate as well as a variable rate. There's all different combinations that you can do with any of these kind of options. 11 states have some measure where they're tying it to fuel prices. Over time, gas has tracked inflation for many years. Now, recently, that's kind of changed somewhat with the big decrease in prices and no one really knowing what's going to happen next. But again, with the floors and the ceilings, they try to take care of some of those changes to reduce that volatility. Some states have a sales tax on fuel. If we did that in Tennessee, at the current average sales tax rate at the state level, that could bring in $1 billion, which is about 4 times what it is now. And locals would bring in $368 million, which again more than doubles that tax if it's done in addition to it. A 1% sales tax on fuel would bring in $147.1 million, which is about a 17.5% increase in those rates. Now, these estimates are actually included, this is from last year's budget document, but they're based on prices of $3.45 for gasoline and $3.77 for diesel fuel, so, you know, it would be a lot lower with current gas prices. The way that a lot of states are looking to go and others are, research organizations are suggesting, includes a vehicle mile travel tax. The strength of that tax is it enhances the user pay principle. Your tax is actually based on the miles you're driven, not the fuel that you use. It could also be used to address other policy goals like congestion, that you charge different rates at different times of the day or different stretches of highway, or it could look at vehicle pavement damage, have different rates based on the damage expected from different vehicles. It has become more feasible administratively with the new technology and such to do that. And there's been several pilot projects in many states, and Oregon is actually going to a program with 5,000 volunteers starting in July that will pay their taxes based on mileage. They will still pay their fuel taxes, and then they will be compensated back based on the miles that they drove during that time period. They're going to do that for 5,000 motorists. Some of the concerns with the vehicle miles travel tax, the public acceptance has been pretty low on moving to this kind of tax. There's concerns with privacy protections in terms of how they're reporting how you report the miles, and can people tell where and when you drove places. There are increased administrative costs to come up with a whole system on how you track this. And there's always the question, if only one state does it in an area or a few states in an area, how do you account for the non-resident driving in those areas? I'm going to turn it back over to Justin a minute to talk about one of the last options.
Well, of course, one of the ways that we've talked about are using bonds to finance our highways, and we can do it. We've got the capacity and the knowledge to do it. But if you're going down this road, you need to understand what the risks are, the limitations, the restrictions, and the consequences. And we have not done this in Tennessee. We're one of 4 states that have not done this. And before you head down this road, let's have some serious conversations, because there are some fairly serious limitations and restrictions to do this. I think at this point we'll answer questions and let her rip.
All right, question.